Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to part 5 of my Kaurismaki season. And we're going to talk about the 1988 film Ariel. Again, this is featured in the Artificial Eye box set, which I would highly recommend because it's got like 17 features and 9 shorts. Speaking of short, this is another film that's only about 75 minutes long, but lots of filmmakers could learn from it because it is very economical. I remember reading a book by David Mamet on screenwriting, and his kind of approach to it was, you don't write a script from the start to the end. You kind of look at plot points, then you build scenes around those plot points. And Kaurismaki does that really well in an economical way in this film. If something happens and that's the most important thing in that scene, then the scene doesn't need to be 10 minutes long. It can literally just be a close-up and a dissolve and moving on to the next scene. And the script is so economical. There's not a huge amount of dialogue, but it is a perfect example of, if your film needs to be 73 minutes long, it's 73 minutes long. It doesn't need to be 105. So it's a basic story about a character called Taisto, who's played by Turo Pajala. Again, apologies for Finnish pronunciations. He looks a bit like Nick Cave, and he's a miner in a wonderful opening sequence, which again is pretty much silent, but it's all you need to know. The mine he works in is closed, and this would appear to be in the north of the country because it's very snowy, and his father tells him to pretty much get out of this town and go down south. His father then goes into the toilet and shoots himself. He is given Taisto keys to his car, an American car with a roof that doesn't work, and he drives to the city. Again, this is Kaurismaki, so characters perhaps don't act in a certain way that we would in the real world. He pretty much just goes into the bathroom, looks at his dead father, and then just takes the car and leaves. There is a kind of, obviously, the kind of deadpan humour of Kaurismaki, which if you don't like, you're probably not going to like his films, but if you like that kind of humour, then you're going to like his films. So he goes to the city. He has about 8,000 marks, which is he's taken out of the bank. Unfortunately, his first night there, when he stops to get a hamburger, he gets robbed, loses all his money, so he doesn't have a job, doesn't have anywhere to live, and he's got no money. So he kind of works at the docks. He kind of has enough money to pay for like a hostel to sleep in. And then in a wonderful scene, we see him driving to the docks, and then we focus on another character, who's Ermeli, played by Susanna Havisto, and she is a divorcee who has a son called Riku, played by Etin Hilcamo. Again, apologies for pronunciations. And it's obvious that she's working multiple jobs, again, to try and pay her rent or furnitures in installments. I mean, if this sounds like quite a depressing downbeat film, it kind of is. If there wasn't those moments of offbeatness, those moments of Kaurismaki humour, it probably would be overpoweringly bleak. Because again, you can kind of tell Kaurismaki doesn't really work for the Finnish tourist board. It's another example of a film about characters that other filmmakers don't really talk about outside of Jarmusch. I know I mentioned Jarmusch quite a lot, but it's very difficult not to consider Jarmusch and Kaurismaki brothers from another mother. As far as the importance of music in their films, the humour, and portrayals of characters and people who other filmmakers just don't bother with. So they happen to meet as she's given him a parking ticket, and they meet and they kind of get together. He spends the night. He's woken up by demands of breakfast by the son at gunpoint. Obviously not a real gun. And their relationship starts. Unfortunately, he bumps into one of the guys that robs him, and in an attempt to get his money back or mete out justice, he ends up being arrested, and he ends up being the one that is charged with assault and attempted robbery, and he goes to prison for a year. Again, as you can see, this is a really upbeat story, but in there he meets McConan, played by Matti Pellenpää, who has so far I think been in all of Kaurismaki films, all 5 so far, and as usual he's quite wonderful, and they basically try and escape and leave the country, this time not to Estonia, which has almost been like a running joke for the first few films, to perhaps Brazil or Mexico. The name of the film is Ariel, and you're just going to have to watch it to work out why it's called Ariel. Again, the plot is simple, but it's the characters. Again, if you're being critical, you could argue because the characters are kind of monosyllabic, there's not a lot of dialogue, you could argue it's hard to identify with them or hard to root for them, but I would kind of disagree with that. I think sometimes in films characters talk too much, and that's not really the case in Kaurismaki so far in these 5 films, because I think you are interested in the characters and you do kind of root for them. You certainly root for their hairstyles. Mullets are still in full effect. Not as much facial hair in this one, but still, obviously McConan has facial hair. There's wonderful little touches of humour, as we eventually find out about the car roof and why it won't go up. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the little moments of the plot. There's lovely little moments that you're just going to have to discover for yourself. Again, it's a wonderful film about the working poor. You know, people who have 2-3 low-paid jobs just to make ends meet. Again, it's about circumstance. You know, through no real fault of his own, Taisto is put in these situations. You know, the mine closes, which isn't his fault. He gets robbed, which isn't his fault. He tries to get his money back, which isn't his fault. But again, it's telling that in the scene where he's sentenced to prison, for example, there's no lawyer fighting for his case. It's pretty much you just have to deal with it because of who you are and where you are in society, because you are basically forgotten about. Pelin Paz, fantastic as McConan, as he's been in all the films so far. He just has a great look, and he kind of gets all the best dialogue. Again, I'm not going to talk about the ending and the choice of music for the ending, but again, music is such an important part in Kaurismaki's films. It's probably my favourite of the colour films so far. It is really good. Again, some people might find it really depressing because again, it's not a happy-go-lucky story, but there is some kind of redemption in the end, I think. And again, if you're tuned to that kind of humour, I think you'll probably get a lot out of it. And if you are a young filmmaker trying to, worry about how long your film should be, it's a perfect exercise in economy. I'm guessing Kaurismaki at this point in his career never really had huge budgets anyway, so you have to kind of be more economical. Sometimes a scene is literally, like I said, a couple of close-ups and a dissolve. That's all it needs to be. But it is a wonderfully precise film. It needs to show exactly what it needs to show, and then it moves on. Yeah, another wonderful Kaurismaki film, and because it is so short, it doesn't overstay its welcome because it's just a perfect length. Again, if it was 2 hours long, it would just be, over fat and just laden down with extraneous stuff that doesn't really need to be there. Whereas this is a really honed, tight film. So thanks very much for watching part 5 of the Kaurismaki season. Please let me know in the comments below if you've seen Ariel, because I'm sure I'd seen it years and years ago, but it was very good seeing it again, especially in this very nice Blu-ray set. There are DVD sets of Kaurismaki you can get as well, but I would highly recommend that Blu-ray set if you can actually find it. So thanks so much for watching again. Leave comments below on Ariel and what you thought of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for part 6. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films saying cheerio.